Welcome back. The time now is 6:14, and it's the first Tuesday of the month, which means it's time for Chapter Chat. And we have a spooky edition today to kick off October. I'm joined by friend of the morning show, Dothan Houston County Library Director Chris Warren. Chris, thanks so much for being here this morning.
Morning, Caroline. Glad to be here.
So tell me about our pick this month. I'm so excited. This is one of my favorite books of all time.
Yeah, so this is kind of a scary but not too scary pick, and it's also a classic. So we decided to go with Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. It's one of those books that I think a lot of us probably read in high school, but probably revisiting it as an adult. You know, why did you read it? You know, you can ask yourself, why did you read it in high school?
Yeah.
And maybe see some things that you didn't notice when you were reading it back then.
Absolutely. And there's a really cool story behind how Mary Shelley wrote this book. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the biography of the author is almost as interesting as the book, if not more so. Mary Shelley wrote the book when she was 18. It wasn't published until 1820, I believe it was 1820, anonymously. And then her name was actually attached to it about a year later. But the really cool thing about it is it was her and a handful of friends, including Lord Byron and Percy Bysshe Shelley, who would later become her husband, were trapped in somewhere due to horrible weather, and they decided that to pass the time, they'd have a contest to see who could write the scariest story. And so Mary Shelley conceived of this story of a scientist who creates life. He's horrified by his creation and spun all of that into a really good story. It's good to note that of those who were gathered for that contest, Mary Shelley was the one who won, who did write the scariest story.
Rightfully so, because
yes.
Like you said, this is a classic, and you also mentioned, I know I had to read it in school, lots of people have to read this as part of their curriculum, but as an adult, why would you encourage people to come back to it? What are some of the themes that you think we can reflect on as adults?
Well, you've got a lot of really there's a lot of really interesting things going on. First of all, it's a really great example of the Gothic novel. It's also a really great example of science fiction, and it's also a really great example of horror, even what we might consider body horror, because you have this creature that's been composed of all of these body parts that Dr. Frankenstein assembles. As far as the different themes and different elements that you might want to focus on as an adult, there's of course pride, because Dr. Frankenstein thinks he can create life, and there's a whole lot of other things that go along with that. But then also the loneliness of the creature. The creature in the book is very articulate, he's very smart. And he's able to communicate a lot about his feelings and all of that. And so kind of seeing all of that, seeing how all those things coalesce, the pride, the science fiction, the horror, all of that, it's a really, really fascinating read for a grown-up.
And of course, one of the perfect ways to kick off a spooky season as we're finally into October, with Halloween quickly approaching. And if somebody wants to pick up a copy, where can they do that? Sure,
so we have lots of copies of Frankenstein at the library, and we have that in part because we got a grant a few years ago to create what we call a school reading collection. So it's intended to supplement kids who have required reading in school. We've got a lot of classics in that collection, and of course Frankenstein's in there. If you can go to any of our locations and borrow those, and if you don't have a library card, as long as you live, work, attend school, or on property anywhere in Dothan and Houston County, you can sign up for a library card.
Perfect. Chris, thanks so much as always. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Caroline.